Hey there, Solar Warriors. I'm Nico Johnson, and this is Suncast. Each week, I pull back the veil on the life and business insights of clean tech entrepreneurs building the most noble and impactful companies of our time. I hope what you learn from this conversation is a catalyst for your own growth. So thanks for tuning in, and welcome to our tribe. All right, Solar Warriors. Today we're going to dive into a topic that I know many of you are interested in, and I don't cover as often as I probably should or would like to. We are going to talk a bit more about how battery storage is changing the landscape for the solar market and probably beyond. And we're going to do that with a friend of mine, Paul Dailey from Outback Power. And Paul recently wrote an article, by the time this is published, it won't have been recent anymore, but recently wrote an article in Green Tech Media called 10 Predictions for the Solar and Storage Market in the 2020s. We're going to dive into that. But first, let me bring Paul into the show. Paul, welcome to Suncast.
Thanks, Nico. I really appreciate you having me on, and hopefully we can give some good, valuable content to the tribe here.
I'm certain we will. For those who are unfamiliar, Paul is a 20-plus year veteran in the solar industry, developing, marketing, and deploying distributed generation tech for things like micro CHP, solar, storage. He's spent time at companies that you would recognize like AEE and Sunrun. Now he is the Director of Product and Market Strategy for Outback Power. Tell me, you guys were bought by a bigger company in the last 18, 24 months. Tell me about that company and how that helped Outback.
Yeah, that's right. So Outback was originally acquired by a company called Alpha back in 2010. And then more recently, late 2018, Alpha as a whole was acquired by a much larger company called Intersys. So Intersys is actually one of the world's largest battery companies. So instead of being an inverter company that sells batteries, we are now a battery company that sells inverters.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's good context for those who don't necessarily know much about Intersys, or even perhaps for folks who are listening don't know much about Outback. To dig a little further as well, Paul has interacted with countless solar installation O&M professionals in his career across the spectrum, and he usually finds himself in the role of translating their inputs into new products for the companies he works for, like the ones I just mentioned, and certainly for Outback, that's the role of the product and strategy director. So today I wanted to take some time with you. I thought it was really interesting, the article that you did in Green Tech Media back into February before the world shut down, that highlighted your take on where storage is going, I'll say for the foreseeable future. You know, the article says that the batteries will be standard on systems by 2025, and it gives 10 predictions. So we're going to go through those, and the purpose is to help the listener understand a bit more of the nuance. It's hard in an article to grab the nuance, and there are a few things that I wanted to just sort of unpack in there. So, you know, I think we won't cover all of the topics, and I'd encourage those who want to check the rest of the article out. I'll link to it in the show notes, as I usually do. But one of the big takeaways that should surprise no one, Paul, is that there's going to be lots of storage. How do you see, I mean, you've been in batteries and storage for a long time. How do you see this really unfolding?
I mean, it's a drum I've been beating for a very long time, as those that know me or have attended any of my workshops in the past. You see the penetration of PV gets to a certain point, and you know it does incur some challenges for grid operators, right? You have power that's either coming in or you have to just like ignore it. And the more PV you have, the less valuable it becomes because it's not dispatchable. Well, what energy storage does is it makes solar power dispatchable. So if we take that by itself, and we even if we set aside wind and all the other really great things that storage can do, that all in and of itself makes it necessary that new PV systems that come online, in the next 10 to 20 to 30 years, increasingly involve batteries.
It's a reality that we've all, those of us who've been in the industry for a decade or more, see happening. And as you point out, the cost curve for storage is something we've all been sort of standing around waiting for, right? Like you and I've been in the industry for more than, for me, nearly 2 decades, even more than 2 decades. And I remember when this same process happened for solar panels, right? We just kind of started seeing that precipitous fall around 2009, 2010 of solar panel pricing. And that essentially matched with the adoption rate in the marketplace because it allowed us to proliferate more installations and finance the systems more easily because the ASP dropped. That said, one of the things that I don't hear people talking much about, which is point number 2 in your article, is that as we add storage, we're obviously adding costs. So we're going to see system costs increase over, I would say probably significantly, as we shift toward batteries. And one of the things why that's I don't see that as a common dialogue right now is because those two costs are decoupled, right? Somebody might buy a system and then add storage later, or there are potentially two different vendors that are selling those products. So how do you see this evolving over the coming 5 to 10 years? And what do you see that system cost increase? How's that going to impact the industry?
It's interesting. The first place where we really noticed this was in Hawaii, right? So back in 2015, Hawaii said, you can't export to the grid anymore, which is an almost de facto requirement to have a battery.
Yeah.
And while the market for batteries grew tremendously, if you looked at the number of systems installed in absolute terms, it shrank. Not dramatically, but almost dramatically, because it was now a higher threshold for your financial payback, for your upfront costs or your financing, whatever it was going to be. Now, I think as the industry has come in, I know during my time with Sunrun, we spent a lot of time on that. And I was one of the main cheerleaders there for, hey, let's go sell batteries in Hawaii. And eventually, we got the green light to go do that. And what we found is, yeah, you're coming in with a higher cost system, but now you can offer much more value, right? So it doesn't have to be a situation like Hawaii where you have no choice, right? It's this or nothing. As we're finding in California, offering a battery in the system provides this resilience value. Assuming you set your system up correctly, it can give you the backup power, and you can choose from varying levels of how much backup power you want. But it now does more, right? And what we found all along is that the ability for the resilience shifts the conversation out of a purely financial analysis into more like a normal consumer product, right? I'm buying this because I want what it gives me.
One of the things that occurs to me is that states like California in particular, and we're seeing this in the Northeast as well, have different incentive models to encourage storage adoption. So on the one hand, you've got state level and probably soon even government level incentives for storage adoption by consumers that can offset this increased cost. On the other hand, you've got companies like Sunrun that implicitly in their sales model offset the cost of storage because they're using it for different ancillary services, right? So they incentivize their users to give them access to the storage capacity to be able to resell that into capacity markets the same way that Sunrun and now many others are attempting to do in regional ISOs. So I think it's really important. And you point out in the article, we want to be sure that in our financial models, well, really in our education of consumers, that we're appropriately highlighting that while we will see overall system costs go up, the actual net cost to the consumer may in fact stay flat or go down. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and I think the pitch is a little bit different. So when I go out and do presentations for solar installers and salespeople, what I tell them is, look, you don't go in there with a battery system and sell it the way that you would sell a pure PV system, right? You don't want to get people fixated on, oh, here's the financial paybacks and doesn't get it. Because for batteries, because of the added cost that's just inherent in having more equipment in there, it's not going to be as attractive. Yeah. And it doesn't tell the whole story, right? So the way that I pitch it to consumers is I say, look, this is a backup system that pays for itself, which, gets that emotional, I want a backup system, and then gives you an excuse. It pays for itself so that you go ahead and pull the trigger on the investment. And that type of approach, and again, it doesn't have to be exactly that, but that type of approach, I think, is more effective when you're selling something like this that has a broader set of values that it provides the customer than just a lower electric bill.
Hey, for my commercial solar warriors out there, do you sometimes feel like prospects are treating you like a dollar per watt commodity? Instead of a race to the bottom, why not add more value to your proposals by including DemandX load flexibility software from Extensible Energy? You can use intelligent AI software to monitor solar production and shift usage patterns of HVAC and other flexible loads. The result is increased savings on energy charges, demand charges, time of use charges, and that makes you and your proposal stand out from the crowd. Who doesn't want that? You can learn all about DemandX and how you can include load flexibility software as part of your proposals at extensibleenergy.com/suncast. And as a bonus, you'll get free load flexibility analysis, sales training, and info on how you can even white label DemandX for your solar company. So go ahead, stand out with DemandX from Extensible Energy.
in particular in California, and as they say, as California goes, so goes the nation and the world. Title 21 makes solar PV standard issue the same way that we have other residential and for sure accoutrements like heat pumps and air conditioners. So with California adopting storage almost inevitably as a standard issue, standard requirement, how will we see this impact the overall sort of the concept of how we sell storage to homeowners? It's very similar to this argument of the benefits versus the value, right?
Yeah, I think so. And to that point, we're already working on the next revision of Title 24 to have it include storage readiness requirements, right? So working with others in the industry, we've come up with some language that basically bakes in not batteries per se, but at least the ability to easily install them later. The next step is basically going to be eventually, as the cost comes down on batteries, they get baked in as well, much like PV just did. Because this is where PV started. So eventually you have a situation where now a home builder, he's got these requirements, and home builders have relatively efficient ways of getting all their stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And there's really no reason that a solar and storage system wouldn't be packaged and presented in that way. So the same, he's going down the list and he's like, okay, I've got XYZ heat pump, and I've got these countertops, and I've got this toilet and this refrigerator and this whatever. Oh, and I've got this energy storage system and this PV system. Or maybe they're the same. I think that's the only question mark to me is, are the PV and the energy storage going to be coupled, or are they going to be plug and play? And I think that just depends on how the technologies evolve and how the players package them.
All of this stuff, in my view, you would certainly know more about this, and so I want to hear your thoughts on. It requires different safety standards and code requirements than what we are currently looking at for integrating these types of systems. So can you bring us up to speed? You're involved in a number of code and standards boards. Where are we now, and where do you see us going from the safety standards perspective?
We had last October an FPA working with the Energy Storage Association put together a safety standard for batteries writ large, right? Just the standard for battery safety called NFPA 855. So that became official in October. It calls out some other similar standards. You have UL 9540, which is relatively new, but it's been around for a few years now. We just got the second edition out this year. So what 9540 does, it's a battery system safety standard. So this would be if you have an energy storage system in your home, California requires that it be listed to UL 9540, which is a requirement that comes out of 855. And so what we're seeing right now is all the building codes and electrical codes are all getting updated. So the NFPA updated the National Electric Code in the 2020 cycle to harmonize with 855. We're seeing that activity go on right now with the International Code Council on the standard building codes that most states adopt. So California has adopted some of that language early. Once the language was finished, it said, okay, here's how these things work. And, it's stuff like, hey, you have to install it 3 feet or more from an entry point, or it's got to have, this kind of fire protection, those types of just typical building safety standards, like water heaters and gas dryers and things like that. The codes are increasingly treating these things as more or less standard appliances. Yeah. And the good news there is now the inspectors are going to be able to know, hey, this is how I inspect for this stuff. This is what I look for. If it has these markings, I know it's okay. If it doesn't have these markings, I know I need to dig deeper and find out what's going on. And as they get more comfortable with it, it's a self-fulfilling cycle.
Yeah. Well, apart from the inspectors and the ease of installation, the ease of integration into a more robust construction system, a lot of folks look at codes and standards as limitations, right? Like when rapid shutdown, as an example, which we, again, don't have time to really go deep down into, when that came out, there was a lot of fear in the industry that it was just going to add cost unnecessarily. What's the upshot then for the NFPA 855 and these other storage standards for the user, for the installer?
This is really the only way to come back from the stories you hear about fires, right? I live in Phoenix now. I'm probably 15 miles from where they had the battery fire in Surprise. When you have an event like that, it puts a lot of fear into the the buying part of the industry, whether it's homeowners saying, hey, these things are dangerous, or utility people saying, hey, these things are dangerous. Having these standardized safety codes is basically, the industry, submitting to, safety organizations like the NFPA and saying, okay, here's how we make it safe. Here's how we know that this is as safe as it can be. Anytime you have a high energy density, product like a big lithium ion battery, there is going to be some risk. And this is how we're going to manage that risk and ensure that it doesn't hurt people, and to a slightly lesser extent that it doesn't damage property. So once you have those and we can list to them, it levels the playing field for everyone.
Yeah.
So now I say, look, we go and we list to this. Yeah, it's a pain in the neck. Yeah, it costs a lot of money, but it gives everyone assurances that someone's looked at this thing, someone has made sure this is safe.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important to build consumer confidence. And as far as the inspections go, as anyone who's done it will attest, having something inspected that doesn't have that kind of standard to guide the inspection is really inconsistent.
Yeah.
Right. So you're going to have inspectors go and, I don't know what this is, and they're going to ask a bunch of questions, and you're going to spend 3-4 weeks on something that should take an afternoon. And these codes really help to rein that in and make it a much more standardized, consistent process. And that's why they're important. And it's just, as manufacturers and to a lesser extent as installers, we need to be involved in creating these standards and at least understanding what they mean.
One of the things that concerns me as a homeowner, and even I think, facilities managers at the C&I level, is there's an increasing need for separating the wheat from the chaff from a data perspective. You point out in your article that it's so common because we're in a nascent period where this technology just isn't widely proliferated. Every manufacturer has their own interface, right? And there's this vision from the homeowner's perspective of having a wall of screens that they have to sort of check, include, your AC, your storage, your solar. Are we heading in a direction where we're actually going to see anything that looks like real automation and integrating these systems into the home automation process such that we can have transactive energy? And we've got span.io and Lumen and others that are automating the process at the control board level, right, at the energy, at the actual electrical panel. How does that world look in the next 5 to 10 years related to optimization of these software?
Yeah, I think, and you've had, I think you've had like Tom Tansey and some of the Sunspec guys on the show before. That's the kind of effort that it takes to make all this stuff play nice together. So I know that since I've joined the company, we've really pushed to get away from our legacy proprietary, comms and control platform onto, Sunspec standardized Modbus, Ethernet, TCP/IP, the kind of stuff that almost anyone involved in IT would know. Let alone anyone doing devices or things like that are common in the power generation business. So the ones you'll hear there, IEEE 2030.5, which is part of the new grid interconnection standard, that's going to be really key for utilities to say, hey, here's what I want the system to do. And what we need to do is make sure all the devices behind that talk to each other, maybe using the same standard, maybe using a subset of it, so that when the signal comes, rather than make a bunch of noise, it says, oh, okay, the utility just said if I eliminate demand, go from my current load on the grid from 2 kilowatts to 1 kilowatt, that they'll pay me, $1.50. That makes sense. I'll do it. Right. Or, hey, if I generate, 3 kilowatts and export it, they'll pay me X. And then it just does it. And at the end of the day, instead of seeing a screen full of charts and graphs and all this other garbage that most people don't even want to look at, it says, you saved $1.55 today. And it just gives it to you in a very meaningful 1 or 2 numbers.
We've got millions, as we wrap this up, we've got millions of systems in California alone now installed and increasingly getting towards that number in other states, which begs the question of sort of compatibility. We could go down a deep rabbit hole on what AC and DC coupling mean, but I'd love to your thoughts as a company that often gets brought in to help installers and homeowners address the question of AC coupling and DC coupling for mostly retrofit, right? Like there's a huge market, obviously, for ESS energy storage systems in new construction, as we talked about. But what do we do with all of these systems that, the millions of systems installed in California that don't have storage right now and who logically are going to want to couple those with their existing PV system or just with their home? Is AC and DC coupling, where do we see that argument fleshing out?
So AC coupling, for those that aren't familiar with it, is basically where you have an existing grid tie inverter or maybe an N-phase, microinverter system or something along those lines. And you don't want to mess with it, right? Because as soon as you mess with that array, now you may have to re-permit a bunch of stuff. You may have to bring it up with, say you installed it in 2014 before rapid shutdown was required. And now, you're going to have to go and upgrade all that stuff, which in most cases you'd like to avoid.
Yeah.
With AC coupling, you can avoid that because you're basically just installing the energy storage system and using the AC output from that grid tie inverter to charge the battery. And that's the only interface that you need to worry about. So it treats the grid tie inverter much like it would a generator. And it says, okay, I'm going to charge the battery with this. Great. What you need to be able to do is just modulate that. So during an outage, you still can provide backup and you can still recharge the battery using that grid tie inverter. But you have to be able to prevent that grid tie inverter from overproducing. And so we accomplish that now with, frequency shifting that basically spoofs the new grid requirements. And so we can not just shut that off, but now we can modulate the output of that inverter very carefully, which makes it much, much better for the batteries and makes your system last a lot longer. So that's a much easier way to do things now. And, we've seen even people that want to have, module level power electronics, opt for AC coupling even for a new system because it enables them to do it in the way that they want to do it. We're happy to serve in either scenario.
You accurately point out in the article that it looks like, and this is one of my big takeaways, that there will be a temporary boom, at least, of AC coupling until at least the PV only retrofit market is saturated, because DC coupling is arguably a better solution from a cost and efficiency perspective. It'll be interesting to see how this fleshes out. I really enjoyed this article, Paul. And for those of you who maybe didn't read the article, want to take a look at it, of course, we are going to link to that article in the show notes, which you can find at mysuncast.com by checking out this episode with Paul. There are a number of other very interesting predictions that Paul alludes to in his article that we didn't have time to cover today, like vehicle to grid, battery pack voltage. I encourage you to go check that out. And in the meantime, you can also check out Paul's LinkedIn profile and get to know Paul over on LinkedIn as well. Paul, super grateful for your time today. This was really insightful and helpful for me to get the story behind the story. And thanks for writing that article. It was really, I found it really interesting and intriguing.
Thanks, Nico. I appreciate the feedback and I'm happy to help.
Absolutely. We'll have you back on here in a few weeks, I think, to do a longer form episode. So for those of you who are maybe checking in for the first time because you followed Paul's social media and he sent you to check out this episode, I'd encourage you to subscribe to Suncast, and you'll see when his longer interview comes out in a few weeks. Till then, Paul, it's been great chatting with you, and we'll talk very soon.
Great. Thanks so much.
That's a wrap on this conversation, Warrior, but I do hope that we'll see you back here on Thursday for this week's long-form interview. I also encourage you to check out other episodes of Suncast and let me know what you think of these shorter-form discussions. Do you want more like this? We've got hundreds of episodes, resources, and highlights from these discussions, along with the social media links for each episode guest, book recommendations, and so much more over at mysuncast.com. And that's also where you'll find other ways to engage with our Suncast tribe, like subscribing to our weekly tribe exclusive emails or even joining our exclusive inner circle of infinite learners and clean economy champions we affectionately refer to as the Guild. If you're on Spotify or iTunes, I do so appreciate your rating and review so that others can also find Suncast more easily. And a special thank you to our sponsors who help make this podcast possible. You can learn more about them at mysuncast.com/sponsor, as well as learn more about becoming a sponsor if that's something that you're interested in. You can follow the links there as well to any of the offers that we've discussed about any of our sponsors here today. Remember, you are what you listen to. Thanks again for showing up, Solar Warrior. It's half the battle.